All right, well, thank you all for being here today. My name is Candace Robertson. I work at EM headquarters leading the Clean Up to Clean Energy initiative, and we're very excited to have WIPP participating as part of this initiative. We've got an exciting agenda today. Thank you for all of you who have joined us in person. We're also going to post this online so that those who weren't able to attend will have the same information. Just a quick couple announcements at the beginning. Safety message, make sure that you're mindful of where the exits are in case there's an emergency. There's one right back here, and then there's one towards the front for me, and I guess the back for you, where you entered. The restrooms are also out that way, just out those doors and over to your right in case you need them. And so we're gonna go ahead and kick this off, and we're gonna start off with a welcome message from Mark Bollinger, site manager.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are a little tired today because we just had a wonderful celebration of our 25th anniversary of waste and placement at the WIPP site yesterday. So that was all an all-day event that went wonderfully, and we're very, very proud that we do something that nobody else in the world can do and has ever done. We emplace waste in a deep geological repository. The rest of the world are trying to do this and designing systems and talking to the public. And the reason we have it, and we've had it for 25 years, is because of this community. So for those of you who think about doing something at the WIPP facility, you should know we can do great things in this community. We have done great things, and we're teaching the world every day about running a deep geological repository. So we have the skills and expertise and an amazing community that's very supportive of those kinds of things. With us today, we have a number of folks. Did Diane Ventura make it? Not yet. We have a number of folks from the community, and that's sort of my point, is many of the people you see in the room, in fact, represent the community here. And they're here, for example, Eddie Rodriguez and Norbert and John. They're here because the community really cares about what would possibly come out of this, and they want to support you in any way they can. So you've got WIPP support, federal government support, and a strong support from the community. We've been actually working here in this community for over 50 years. Our Sandia partners have been studying the site, preparing the site for 25 years before we ever actually started emplacing the waste. So we understand long-term commitment and getting things done. What's the outcome of our 25 years? We have cleaned up with true waste from 22 sites around the country. So this is truly a national treasure. We are, as described by communities around the complex, we are the cornerstone for EM's cleanup mission. And so we are an integral part and a terribly important part for getting the job done of cleaning up the Cold War legacy. So this is obviously a first-of-a-kind initiative, the Clean Up to Clean Energy, announced by the Secretary Jennifer Granholm last July. We're one of 5 DOE sites to participate in this process so far. And the leader of the EM program for many years now and has been responsible personally and with our team for a tremendous amount of progress is Ike White. And Ike's here with us today from Washington. He's been in his position since June of 2019. He provides leadership for the safe cleanup of 5 decades of nuclear weapons development and government-sponsored nuclear energy research. Under his leadership, EM has made significant progress in cleaning up that legacy from the Cold War era. I'd like to welcome Mike to the phone.
All right, thanks, Mark. It's really good to be here this morning. It's nice to see so many folks turn out for something that is really important to the Department of Energy. I want to talk to you about a couple little things this morning, just sort of set up like what we're trying to do here and why it's so important to the cleanup program. But also make sure that all of you think of this in terms of the opportunity that I think exists and why I think that opportunity is important and why it's actually sort of such an important thing to be successful here at WIPP. So for those of you who don't know, the environmental cleanup program for the Department of Energy is actually the world's largest environmental remediation program. If you look at the scope of work that we have to do around the country, it's about $400 billion worth of currently identified work that we need to do around the country. An enormous amount of progress has been made. Mark sort of highlighted that. WIPP has been an incredibly important part of that in the past and going into the future, because you can't do nuclear cleanup if you can't dispose of nuclear waste. And so WIPP is really a crucial part of that cleanup program. But as we execute that cleanup program around the country, one of the things that is important from my perspective is that we do that in a way that sets an example from an environmental perspective, right? We have to do our cleanup program in a way that sets an example for what we would like to see environmentally in the future. That means conducting the program in a way that is sustainable, and that means looking for opportunities to support the broader environmental missions of the government and set up not just our cleanup program, but also set up the planet for success in that regard. This effort for Clean Up to Clean Energy came out of a number of different events. We had seen some interest from the clean energy industry as this administration kicked off a big focus on clean energy. We had seen some interest from industry in making use of the federal lands that we have around the country that we haven't been able to do land transfer on. And then in talking with some specific communities, there was also a desire to focus some of the future economic development in these communities, which had supported environmental cleanup for so long, around things like clean energy as well, wanting to be a part of that clean energy revolution going into the future. And so as we thought about it, we had a team of folks at headquarters who kind of looked around the country, looked at sites where we have land that we can't, for different reasons, transfer and we need to keep inside the federal government framework, but that wasn't being effectively utilized. And so you have an opportunity there where you have underutilized assets that the government has that we felt could be put to public good. And in this case, the public good meaning supporting the energy transition that needs to occur over the next couple of decades, and to do it in a way that supports economic development for communities where we have the cleanup program. For communities like Carlsbad in particular, I think the opportunity that exists is two things. One, it's always great to be part of an opportunity where you can see going into the future that this is in fact the future, right? And so this is an opportunity to take advantage of underutilized federal resources, participate in that clean energy future, and be a part of that. So I think that's a fairly exciting opportunity. It's also a really great opportunity for industry around the country to work with communities that have a long history of being able to effectively work with the federal government. So communities like Carlsbad, for example, we had a 25th anniversary celebration that Mark mentioned earlier over the last day. And one of the things at different events we had was talking a little bit about the history of the website here. And a lot of that history really is about community involvement and community support, right? It was a community idea in the 70s that led ultimately to sort of taking advantage of an opportunity to support the national security and the cleanup program going into the future, an opportunity to think about economic development for the community, and that sort of working with the government to think about that opportunity and translate that opportunity going forward is something the community here has an enormous amount of experience with. So for all of you who are interested in the assets that we have in the government and being able to utilize those on the clean energy side, one of the things I encourage you all to do is to talk to the community. I see John Heaton here this morning. John and I were chatting earlier. There are opportunities to talk to folks like John, think about what the community would like to see, and think about the opportunities that exist to work with the community going forward to help enable the success of whatever projects that you're thinking about. I mean, just a sort of a little example of how we're able to work successfully with the community to think about the future needs and have them work with us to make sure that our program can be successful. One of the things that, during the course of the pandemic over the last 3 years that really struck us in the cleanup program was issues with workforce going forward, right? So just like a lot of industries around the country, we suffered from a lack of highly skilled labor to do some of the critical jobs that we need to do at sites around the country. One of the communities that came forward to the department with ideas to help us solve that problem was Carlsbad. So I met in a meeting I had with the community here, we talked about taking advantage of a community asset, Southeast New Mexico College, thinking about how to work with the local school to create programs that would develop the skilled trades workforce pipelines that we need at WIPP, benefit the broader community, and help us solve a problem that enabled the future of success of our site. So I think, you know, the opportunity to work with the community, to think about the obstacles that your project might have, and to think about how you can overcome those, getting that kind of support, not just from the federal government and from folks who are used to working it through all kinds of things like NEPA analysis and permitting and all that other fun stuff that's required to make any project successful, but also being able to work on things like vendor supplies and workforce pipelines and the things that you need from an economic development perspective as well. So I encourage all of you who are interested to think about that, think about the opportunities that this presents. I think is an exciting point. I know my boss is excited. I meet with the secretary almost daily. And I would say that at least once a week, she and I talk about the status of this effort around the country. So this is something the administration is very supportive of. I know my boss wants to make it successful, so you have the Department of Energy aligned with trying to help make projects successful that fall under this umbrella. And I know the community here is very aligned as well. I've had discussions with community folks, and I've talked to the mayor, I've talked to John about the opportunity this might provide. And so I know the community folks are very excited as well. So I just wanted to leave you with the idea that as you talk to the experts this morning and think about the art of the possible, I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity here to be a part of the clean energy future that we all need to happen over the course of the next couple of decades. And so with that, Candace, do I turn it back over to you? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ike. And we're excited to also have the Deputy Director for the New Mexico Environment Department, Sydney Linneman, here to offer a few remarks as well from the state's perspective.
Hi there, I'm Sydney Linneman. I'm the Deputy Cabinet Secretary at the New Mexico Environment Department. And I was delighted to have the opportunity to come down to Carlsbad to celebrate the 25th anniversary of WIPP yesterday. That was great. But the reason that I actually got in the car with my colleagues and came down was because I am so excited about this project and this initiative. This really, from my perspective, combines so much of the work that my administration, the administration of Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, has done around climate change and around thinking about how climate change and economic growth have to really go hand in hand. And I think this is kind of the perfect opportunity for us to see how that can happen in practice. One of the things that I heard over and over again yesterday and at the reception last night was this real commitment to community. WIPP was really born out of this commitment to collaborate with the community, to work with the community. And this is just another example in my mind of how WIPP and DOE are in it for the long haul and are committed to growing this community, not just for the purposes of their cleanup, but also for thinking about really creative and interesting ways that DOE assets can support the community, can support our transition to renewable energy, can support our transition to reducing the carbon intensity of our economy. Since I have everyone's attention, because they let me speak, I am going to just mention a couple things that we put into our letter in response to the RFI. If folks have heard either my boss or my boss's boss, the governor, speak, you've probably heard them talk about hydrogen. We're very excited about hydrogen. And so one thing that we see as really exciting about this site is you are closely sited to a lot of produced water from the oil and gas industry. You have all this land that could potentially be used for solar energy. And we think kind of putting those things together, you have a great opportunity to use produced water to create renewably sourced hydrogen. One of the initiatives that we're working on and hoping to bring to the legislature next year is this strategic water supply, this idea that we have limited freshwater supplies. We need to look for opportunities to reduce the strain on those freshwater supplies, and we think that produced water and brackish water are a great opportunity when they can be used within kind of closed loop industrial applications to support the clean energy transition. And so the timing feels really great for that for us, but we are supportive of this effort. Whatever ends up coming out of the RFP, we're really excited about. Many of you likely know, we have a law of the Energy Transition Act which requires us to get to zero carbon electricity by 2045. And I think we're making great progress, but projects like this and opportunities to collaborate with the federal government and help you all support your efforts to decarbonize, support our efforts to decarbonize, we're delighted to be here and look forward to being partners with you all as you move along this process. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to turn to our esteemed panel, and I'll go down the line and ask each of you to introduce yourself, and then some of you may have a presentation. If not, then if you just want to say a few words regarding your role in this and anything that folks should know, that would be great. So I'll start with you, Josh.
My name is Josh Atkins. I'm a NEPA compliance officer here at WIPP, and I also oversee the land management plan.
Good morning. I'm Rob Seifert. I'm the director for the Infrastructure Management and Disposition Policy Office in EM headquarters, and I get the pleasure of working with Candace on the Clean Up to Clean Energy initiative. But my office is also responsible for the overall clean energy initiatives, the carbon-free, and things like that. So that's how I got, the nexus that we have with that.
Good morning. My name is James Lackey. I am Community Relations Manager and Economic Development Manager for Xcel Energy for all of Lee and Eddy counties in New Mexico. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gregory Sod. I'm responsible for security for the waste isolation pilot plant operations. And I'm here to primarily answer questions and explain what the department will do to assure the security of the current operations as we allow other work to continue in the area.
Thank you so much. And so, Josh, you're first up with your presentation.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Josh Atkins again. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the WIPP site location. We're in New Mexico, right here between Eddy and Lee County. Next slide, we got 16 sections. These are the 16 sections of WIPP. This is the most attractive to least attractive areas, and the reason we did that is there are more natural and cultural resources over in this area, and there's less in this area, and the terrain is also a little bit flatter in this area. We believe there's enough room to fit everything right in here. Next, please. This is also another aerial shot, so you can kind of see basically how flat we are in New Mexico. Next slide, please. So to do this, we'll have to do something called NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. There's 3 levels of it. First one's a KTEX, an environmental assessment, or an EIS. We do not know which level of documentation we will need because I don't know exactly what we're proposing here, but it kind of goes from CX all the way down to EIS. CX can take anywhere between maybe 30 to 60 days to complete. Environmental impact statement takes between 18 to 24 months, up to 4 years, really. And then the EA is 12 to 16 months, usually a year typically. So the applicant role on this, basically we'll need you to provide the information because I will not know how to do a NEPA analysis until I know exactly, what you guys are proposing to do, how you're doing, how much area we would need. But once we get all that information, we can kind of go through there and outline it, and we'll be able to tell you a better idea of what exactly we'll need to do. Next slide, please. DOE's role. We will probably need to do Section 7 and Section 106 consultation, which is Section 106 is with the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Officer. And then, but this will all kind of roll up into the EA or the environmental document because we have to get all these consultations done in order. But we will walk you through it. The other one is the Section 7, which is a biological assessment. We will do that with Fish and Wildlife. That's pretty much it for this slide. Next slide. And that's it. That's all I really got to say. Do you guys have any, or should I just go straight to you, Robert? All right. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, I don't have a slide presentation, so but I do want to say, I mean, this is this is a part of a bigger program, right? I mean, as has been mentioned, there are 5 different sites that are subject to this first. I'll say first initiative of Clean Up to Clean Energy. 3 within the EM program. So Hanford and Savannah River have already issued requests for qualifications. We're expecting responses back here in the next few weeks. You guys are at the request for information standpoint. So right now, this is kind of a who's out there, who's interested, and what kind of questions do we have that would lead us to an RFQ, or the request for qualifications, that would set us up for making some decisions along with a big body of people to figure out where we go next. And as you can see, I mean, there's a lot of land here that is subject to clean up to clean energy. There's opportunities. Again, there's we want to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for a sustainable future. So these types of efforts are going to be really important to help set us up for the future. Now, I will say, as Josh had mentioned, that there is some timelines and timeframes involved. Once we get responses from the RFI and the RFQ, then the real work begins, because that's when the nuts and bolts happen. That's when the planning happens. Right now we can talk about a 2 to 4 year, a 3 to 5 year, whatever that looks like in terms of getting shovels in ground and things like that. But it really is just going to depend, because we'll get the responses in. We'll work with whoever is the selectee or the selectees from those responses, and then that first phase. And if anybody is tracking what's going on at Hanford and Savannah River, you'll see we've got basically 3 phases of the program after selection. That first phase is the planning phase, and that is 3 to 5 years-ish. I mean, it could be whatever, it'll be whatever it needs to be. I mean, obviously we'll work as expeditiously as possible, but that's when the communities get involved. That's when, really involved. That's when, the planning sessions are happening. That's when consultations with tribes are going on. That's when the NEPA is happening, the National Historic Preservation Act analysis going on. All of that has to lead up to shovel in ground. That's that phase 1. And as you know, for those particularly who are in the XLs, the clean energy world, and others, there's a lot of work that goes into that planning stage. And so that first phase is that collaborative, bring everybody to the table, figure it out, who has equities, who has intersections, and make sure that all those voices are heard, so that the plans are firm and sustainable, right? And then, once we go into, the next phase of construction, again, a lot of work goes on into that as well. That's going to depend, right? We'll see what comes in, whether it's a hydrogen facility or solar or whatever. We'll have to rely on those responses to help dictate what those timeframes are, which will lead to the third phase, which is the operations, and that's the contemplated long-term realty agreement, whether it be a lease or an easement or something else, that would allow that company to come in, operate for nominally 30 to 40 years, and then we kind of go from there. But kind of along the lines, one of the things that we want that we're really kind of holding on to is the ability to adapt, to stay flexible and nimble throughout this process. Because again, we've not done this before, and so we're embarking into some new territory, trying to make best of some underutilized lands within the federal government's portfolio. So as we are learning, we're trying to stay flexible, so that as we get new information, as we hear new feedback, as we are finding out that there are new innovative ways to do things, we can stop and not just say, well, no, this is just what we're going to do. We want to be able to say, well, what's the right answer? And how do we do this in a way that is going to meet everybody's needs within the community, at the site, consistent with the operations, so that we're not impacting, the WIPP operations, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's going to take all of the voices coming in to be able to do that. So, having the conversations is important. Candace and I are spending a lot of time, meeting with communities and tribal nations and industry and regulators and other stakeholders, so that we can make sure that what we're putting in our asks of the industry folks, can come back with good information that can be used to make the decisions. So again, it would be lovely if we've done this so many times that it's like, well, here's just the template, but we're building this plane as we're flying it. Maybe a bad analogy, but that's really kind of what we're doing, though, right? I mean, we're trying to make sure that we're successful, and to be successful, we have to get the information. So these types of events are really going to be tantamount to the success that we'll experience collectively. So, and that's what I will have. So I'll pass it off to James.
I'll be available to answer some questions, and that's probably why I'm here. I bailed out Candace one time, so.
You bail me out every time. If you want to just give any sort of quick overview of the anticipated need and any
Sure.
quick overview about the interconnection process, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so if we would have done this 20 years ago, it would have been a real easy, because we would have just been able to get all the answers ourselves. And now we have our regional transmission organization, the Southwest Power Pool, that we have to work with for the interconnections there. And of course, the new. Did it just go out? Oh, okay, good. Whew. All right. Within the Southwest Power Pool process, it can be an arduous process. Supposedly they've cleaned it up, and it's supposed to be a lot more straightforward. One of the ways that they've cleaned it up is to push out people that aren't real players, and the way that they do that is by increasing the price to come to the table. And so we think that what they're looking at right now, from what we've heard, is the price to come to the table with the Southwest Power Pool, which was nothing decided by us, so don't throw darts at me, is about $3 million to start for somebody who's wanting to do a project. So that keeps out low liars that can slow down the process in their mind. So there's that aspect that we have to look at, and then there's the going through their interconnection studies. And so those processes can take, the last one took 8 years. Supposedly they've cleaned it up to where it only takes 16 months now, but I haven't seen them hold to a timeline yet. Don't quote me on that, but I haven't, from what we've seen, we haven't seen them hold to that to a timeline yet. So we're anxious, and we're hopeful that they've streamlined their process. It'll make it easier for people to interconnect to the grid, providing electricity and distributed generation and different things. There is a need. I was cheating. I felt like I was in high school. I was looking over at Rob's page here, and he's got a line item that says there's a need for an additional 5 megawatts. Yeah, 5. Put 2 more zeros right there. 500 is really where the need is. There's a need of probably 500 megawatts out there. And so, if you've read the Washington Post lately or anything in energy news, you know that the AI and data centers and facilities like that are swallowing up power around the United States faster than we can generate it, and faster than we can build the generation facilities. So we're looking at being in a position where, with decisions that were made by the SPP, which we'll respect and play along with, we're going to be in a shortfall of being able to connect with what our customers are demanding by the middle of probably next year. Of course, we have RFPs out and things that'll be coming out and things like that. But the benefit for people that are going to participate into an RFP to interconnect within our footprint are those that already have a project that has been identified. Like what you're saying, you don't know what kind of NEPA we're going to do because we don't know what kind of technology we're going to install, right? And so knowing what kind of technology is going to be installed and having those interconnection facilities within a geographic location already established are very, very helpful for for their studies and the way that they do their transmission layouts and where the faults are on those systems, being able to determine that. So, there's a lot that goes into it. I could talk for a while about that, but I'll answer if anybody has any more direct questions. I'll answer those.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and go to Greg before we open it up to questions. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So my presence here is primarily to answer any questions people would have regarding what security interfaces would look like and what our expectations are. But as Josh mentioned, we operate under the WIPP Land Withdrawal Act, and that law defines what's multi-use and open to the public, all the way to what areas are restricted for government operations. So we can help define that depending on where any work projects could be located at. As Mr. Seifert mentioned, the planning phase is a great time for us to actually determine what those areas are, build the planning for that, for the construction phase, what your expectations are. I think the proximity to the security perimeter of the WIPP facility changes what the expectations would be, and likely we may have to redefine any work project areas that are further away from that proximity. So. Don't consider security as a restriction. It's more like we're here to work and help with the planning project to make sure that it serves the government's interest to protect current operations and make sure that we open the doors for this kind of work as well. Can we do questions now?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and open up for questions. I'll just want to recognize that we have received a lot of interest through the request for information from a variety of developers, including solar, nuclear, and even other technologies. And present, we have not only some potential developers, but we have a lot of local industry, local design build firms, local suppliers, which is going to be critical to the success of any project here. So we want to open it up for questions or comments. We're going to ask that we've got someone here that's going to run around the microphone. So raise your hand if you want to say anything. Please make sure you do speak into the microphone because this is being recorded. And please identify yourself and what entity you're with, if you're with an entity. And so with that, we'll go ahead and open it up. While we're waiting for questions. Oh, okay, go ahead, Mark.
First, a comment. I think Rob's number was probably looking at the immediate need we have at the DOE site for just the WIPP need, and so we do have a need that we could meet for a very small project just to meet our needs. My question to James is, how much of that 500 would be directly attributable to the oil and gas industry, and obviously we know that industry fluctuates, so what would that mean to your plans?
I'm sure that the oil and gas industry could use 100% of that, and they wouldn't have a problem doing that, and then more on top of that. But we want to make sure that we have enough capacity on our system to diversify into whoever wants to come here and do business here, and not just simply to supply that, but serving our native loads and those oil and gas customers that already exist, that are already doing business here. I mean, as a regulated utility that has an obligation to serve, we're gonna do that and serve that. I know that there's some people in the room that are working on a project currently for NextEra that's bringing in a dual circuit 345 kV line that'll probably bring in about 1,000 megawatts of power into the area. A lot of that power is already spoken for. When we talk about clean energy and we're working toward cleaning up energy around here, when we look out in the oil field today, there are, I think it'd be fair to say, hundreds of generators, diesel and gas, that are probably producing hundreds of megawatts of power that are getting consumed out there that are not on our system. And so anything that we can do to produce it cleanly, partner with somebody that can interconnect to us onto the grid and provide that cleanly, we're game.
Good morning. My name's Eddie Rodriguez. I'm with the City of Carlsbad. I'm City Councilor here. One of the comments made earlier was that Carlsbad was very supportive, and I want everyone here to understand, everyone that lives here knows that. Carlsbad is a community that knows when opportunity knocks, it's not wearing a tuxedo. It's wearing bib overalls and looks a whole lot like work. So we're ready. I think that's what separates us from the rest of the nation. I've got two questions. One of them is, of the projects being considered, is there anything that's off the table? And are projects like small modular reactors and that type of industry also being considered as clean energy? And the second part would be for Mr. Lackey once again. Would storage of potential, the transmission and balancing be timely with new innovation? And if not, is there a lead or lag time for you?
That sounded really technical.
That's
Which
why we
part
have
of
you.
that do you want to tackle in part two?
The lead and lag can be part two.
Go. You want to elaborate just a little bit more?
Sure. As the energy becomes available, once these projects are up and running, the electrical circuit, the grid will need time to adjust, be able to balance the load, be able to provide the transmission of those lines, and then have the storage of that potential until it's called upon. How much time, once we know what's coming, would our transmission system need in order to build that infrastructure to be able to provide what's coming at us?
Yeah, Eddie, that's really going to depend on the size of the project that's approved out here. We may have enough capacity. From Josh's map, you saw that on the east side of the property, it was backwards for me. So on the east side of the property is where he kind of identified was the primary area of interest.
Yeah, yes.
And so we have 115 kV lines that flow through that area, or that run through that, run just outside of that perimeter. And then on the opposite side of the property, we actually have 345 kV lines that run. And so it really depends on the size of the project. If somebody comes in and they put in a 5 megawatt project or a 10 megawatt project, or even probably up to a 50 megawatt project, we can probably tie that into our existing infrastructure that we have with the upgrades that are approved through the SPP study, right? So there's that timeline, but the potential for no upgrades. Somebody comes in with something much larger, it may be we have to bring another circuit all the way in to grab that, and it really varies, Eddie. There's no real straight, clear answer for you on that. Sorry. You gonna answer part one?
Wait, well, so what I'll say is, because you'd asked about the storage as well, right? So again, as we get into that phase one, that planning stage, the responses are going to come back, and storage is a part of that contemplation, right? So when they say we're going to bring on a 250 megawatt, then and it's going to require so much storage because again, like you were saying, that load's going to get generated. And then what are you going to do with it? Can you just dump it into the grid? Is there use for it right then? So as we look at the design of the facility, whatever gets proposed, we would contemplate what storage, and of course that would have to be fully vetted and discussed with Excel and with others as well. So that'll be a part of the conversation. Would be what storage is required. Is there sufficient storage now? Or do we even need the storage? Going to go straight into the grid because oil and gas or whoever is there's plenty of customer downstream for it, or do we need a certain amount of storage in order to to manage that load until it can get pushed out into the grid to to the customer? So I think that storage is a part of the design. that we would consider. It's not a you have to have the storage, but it is a question of is it needed. So that'll be part of what we would be looking at, and in discussions with with the site, with the community, with the utilities, others, to make sure that we've got eyes on that.
And to answer the first part of the question, we're technology neutral as long as it meets the definition of, in the executive order, to be carbon pollution free. So that even includes fossil fuels if there's adequate carbon capture technology partnered with it. Certainly includes nuclear, solar. I don't think you're going to have wave technology here, but pretty much anything is on the table as long as it meets that definition. And I'll just note that we're trying to provide information on where we think the land might be most desirable to you because there might be the least amount of mitigation, but it doesn't preclude you from potentially proposing something on other parts of the land, especially if it was going to be nuclear, for example, which might take a smaller footprint, but you want to be closer to the, larger load lines. Like please, as developers are developing their proposals when we send out the RFQ, please put in what you think is best, right? We're just trying to help you understand the environmental characteristics of the land so that then you can apply your own models and logic to what you think would be optimal for developing this land. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, could you tell us something about sort of the universe of enterprises or of where these proposals are supposed to come from? I assume, Excel could use the power, but do you expect a proposal from Excel, or do you hope for proposals from independent generators that then would feed into the Excel system? And then connected to that, a question that goes more into the environmental stuff, and we had two gentlemen explain to us, the bureaucratic jungle you have to pass through in order to get anything really done. WIPP has done, related to various aspects of the site, environmental analyses, impact statements, or whatever, first stage, second stage, third stage, and, it fills boxes. So apparently we wouldn't have to start from scratch, but can you give us some idea of how much you might have already that you could build on rather than starting from, ground zero?
Yeah, excellent point. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll get a start on that and
Okay.
then jump in.
Okay.
So there has been a lot of work done for sure, and to the maximum extent practicable, we will build off of what has already been done. As you noted, there's been a lot of work, in environmental study. There's been a lot of work from local utilities in terms of the existing grid. So we will lean into all of the information that is already there. We've made that available to the potential respondents. Is that what we would call them, respondents? I'm making words up. Offerers. We want to make sure that as they are building their concepts and their plans, that they are understanding that they're not starting at ground zero. They're not starting at a base information of zero. That there has been a lot of work. In terms of, and I may not be answering the question right, so again, we'll kind of see where we go from there. But we're certainly seeing a lot of variety in terms of who is responding. As you've heard from Sydney, the state is very interested in hydrogen. There's a huge obvious push in solar and wind. And nuclear. So, we're seeing a lot of different companies, participating, through the RFI process, which is, again, that first step in the just understanding the universe of who has interest to do, work at the, at the site in this Clean Up to Clean Energy initiative. I think that it'll be interesting as we're getting all of the responses from the offerers at the 3 EM sites, that where we might see some overlap in companies who are, I can do this at any and all of them, and what efficiencies can be gained and all kinds of different things, but keeping in mind that they will be separate and independent work efforts at the sites. But I think we're seeing a lot of different a lot of different groups who are coming in. I don't know that if you want to speak specifically to some of the others, or if you have others.
Yeah, well,
ideas there.
I'll just summarize what we're seeing across all 5 sites. So we've seen some instances where utilities are interested in potentially directly developing and/or being the ones to go find the developer. Mostly, we're seeing independent developers that want to come in and develop something themselves in consultation and cooperation, of course, with the utility. So James, if you want to opine on whether you guys are going to offer something, please do. But it's up to you. I don't know if you guys have made that decision yet.
I don't think we have.
Okay, all right. So we're certainly open to hearing from Excel as well as anybody else who might be interested in developing the land. But I think a couple of points that came out of this discussion just to highlight. One, we have a very interested and cooperative utility. Whether they actually submit their own proposal or not, they are willing and eager to work with those who are selected to move forward. And 2, as you noted, sir, we do have a lot of information about this land that I think is a distinguishing characteristic than if you were going to try to go get private land or other things to develop. And we have legal authority that does not require us to get paid fair market value to use the land. And so we have asked in the other RFQs that have gone out for developers to note what consideration or payment they would provide to the government, because that could be a factor, but it's not the determining factor, and it's not something that's legally required. So we have abundant land that's well characterized that could be offered potentially below fair market value, with a utility that's interested in working with you, communities and the state that are interested in seeing this happen, and the federal government who will do everything we can to streamline the bureaucracy that comes with working with the federal government. All right, any other questions? Yeah.
You know, we're here in Carlsbad and we're at WIPP, so we're not talking about Savannah River or Hanford or some other sites. So let's, talk about local conditions. But what the regulatory side here talked about, I think, was more generically of what all this environmental stuff might, how much time it might take to do all this stuff. Well, I think we established right now in response to my previous questions that the situation is not such that we start from scratch. So the generic answer was sort of, well, very generic. Can you give us an idea of how much all building on all that previous knowledge could accelerate the process and get actually something done faster? Because if I understand what Excel is planning is, they would rather have the 500 megawatts, and right now I get the impression the 500 megawatts is sort of the lower bound, and they could use maybe 1,000 or 1,500. They would rather have that today than tomorrow. And so how much could it be accelerated by having all that previous knowledge? And then sort of a practical question. Let's assume we're talking about 500 megawatts. I would say the easiest or the fastest way to get 500 megawatts is not having it pieced together by whatever, 20 small operations, but by one. Okay, build one big plant. I'm not saying I'm advocating that or what have you, but that seems to be the simplest way, especially running it through this, permitting jungle. Does anyone on this panel, or anyone in the room for that matter, know of a 500 megawatt project that was recently, built or accomplished? And can you tell us how much time did it take for that project from that RFI to actually being in place? Because that seems to be about the ideal situation if you want to get something done fast. And then let's see, is that actually something that we could accomplish here within the time frame that Excel or anybody else needs this power?
So we won't be able to have it online by next year. That I can say with certainty. I don't know, James, if you have, especially in this region, any examples of how long a project like that might take from conception to operations.
Yeah, so I'll speak to one that's been in the paper recently, and it's not complete, but it's given us the timeline that we're seeing right now of what we have, and so there's a solar project over near Hobbs that was just approved and came through the 2016-2 DICES study, which means it was submitted in the second half of 2016. It was just approved. It took 8 years for that approval to come through. For us, because of supply chain issues on like 115 breaker, like 115 kV breakers, those are we're probably looking at a 3-year design and installation lead time. So we're looking at 11 years probably before, currently with that project, which is the one that we have looking at. Now, the thing that's going to change that, before you write that down in your notes and say that a project's going to take that long, is that DICES study time period that the SPP did. That there was a reason for the delays in that one. That was 2016. Large government subsidies came out for clean energy projects. Everybody wanted in the game. Whenever they started allocating the costs out to the different people, they started bailing out. Then they had to redesign it for only generators in these 10 spots instead of in these 30 spots, and the costs got allocated across those remaining players, and then some of them dropped out, and then it went down to, so it just which is why they're increasing the cost to get in to those studies. And they think that they've streamlined those studies now to the point where that 8-year time frame, which I think was a shock to them, also is now what they're telling us is probably attainable within the 16 to 18 month time frame. So when you take 8 years down to 16 to 18 months, that's quite an improvement. Hopefully that's one that they can attain to. But those things are, as a utility, those things are out of our hands. I mean, they're one of our, they control the transmission over, I don't know what it is, 13, 14 states, something like that in the Southwest Power Pool right now. So, if we use that timeline, and let's hope that the supply chain things start to somehow self-correct after the nightmare that came in like 2020 when they stopped producing things because they never thought we were going to do anything in the whole world ever again for some reason. But no, they stopped all those manufacturing and then got this huge backlog, right? So hopefully those things self-correct, and those timelines that we're seeing on supply chains for large transmission level breakers drop from 3 years back to 16 or 18 months, and hopefully some of these things can start moving at a faster rate. Yeah, we're under no delusion that we can get power in the timeline that we're needing it. Just the growth in this area, and we throw around these numbers like 500 megawatts, which is a lot of people don't understand when we look at a number like that. That say the Cunningham plant over in Hobbs that was built in the 1950s and 1960s that's still operational today was designed, and it ran about 300 megawatts, and it sufficed this area for a long, long time. And now we have pretty close to that running on diesel and gas generators out in the oil field today. So when we look at scale and we say we need 500, and when we look at these AI data centers that are going in around the nation and they're wanting 1,000, we'll take 1,000 megawatts. I mean, the scale of energy consumption in our country has just gone completely, what's the right word for that, out of control? Through the roof, yeah. So we're working in a totally different world now.
Okay.
Does that help on the timelines? I mean, we don't really have one that's like all the way to implementation, 500 megawatts today, because it's just it's just not there, and not in our territory.
And I know there's another couple parts to your question as well.
On that solar project that you mentioned, did you have to deal with the federal government with all this stuff that we talked about earlier, or was that mostly private?
No, private land.
enterprises? Okay, so.
So that part was streamlined.
It's my experience dealing with the federal government at WIPP. I worked for many years for WIPP. It's that experience is a hell of a better guide to what you might accomplish than good intentions stated by bureaucrats.
Yeah, there's a reason I don't work at the Pantex facility anymore.
All right. Yeah, we'll go to John Heaton next. I'll just to try to address a couple of the other points that were raised. So we can't obviously commit to how long the NEPA process will take without more specific facts about what we're looking at. To your point about having a bunch of small projects string together, we have announced that our intention is to have 200 megawatt or greater projects. So we're not really looking to have dozens of small projects string together. And then on the NEPA timeline piece, I don't know, Josh or Rob, if you could just talk about how long getting the level of information we already have would typically take, because that would be the reduction. But then whether it's a reduction from the categorical exclusion timeline or the EIS timeline is going to be very fact-driven. Yeah, so.
It's the surveys and it's the natural resource surveys that will probably take the longest because we have to wait for nesting birds and things of that type of nature to do that. But the cultural resource surveys we could do pretty much any time of the year. So it'd be the natural resource surveys where we may have a hang up, but we would just time it.
No,
It's all about timing.
But based on the information that we already have, like how much of a leg up do we have? Have we cut? Yeah.
I want to get the land surveyed. So we need to get the land surveyed first, and then we will go from there.
Okay. John.
Thank you. Again, my name's John Heaton, and I think that I'd first like to make some comments about the community. And I think that Carlsbad is a very unique community in many, many ways. One of the features that I think about, having lived quite a long time and lucky to do so, but Carlsbad gets its teeth in a project, whether it's a national park, whether it's a dam, whether it's the WIPP project, and the list goes on. But when they get their teeth in it, that project continues to go administration after administration after administration. And it's passed on, and it's continued. And that support typically grows. It doesn't diminish with each new administration in the community that comes about. And the support gathers speed, gathers breadth, if you will, and becomes a real project that the whole community ends up learning about, supporting. And so what I think is important about that is that those of you that are companies that are interested in coming to the site, and I think that's the expectation, is that you know that when you come to Carlsbad and you move to the WIPP site to establish a business, that you will get undying support from this community. And I think that is really, really important to be able to understand that you will be sustained over years, decades. And so knowing that, I think, is important for a company that's making a decision that's going to go on perhaps for 70, 80 years. So I think it's important to know that you're going to have that sustained support. So the other thing about the community is right now we're in the process at our college of putting a workforce training building in place, a 40,000 square foot building that for workforce training. And so it will cover the gamut of whether it's nuclear training, whether it's mining, whatever it happens to be, it will be in place. And also all the ancillary Trades will be part of that operation. So I think you need to know that you will have a sustaining workforce development attitude in the community, which is also really important. So I want to point that out to those of you either online or here that may be interested in establishing a facility on the site. And I think that's what this period is about, is trying to get companies across the United States or locally that want to come to the site and avail themselves of free property. And then when we talk about the site, there are, I mean, it shows you the most desirable area on the right, but the reality is there's a lot of property there that can be utilized, not just that specific area. So even the whole 9,000 acres could be utilized in one way or another. And as Candace said, this is the most studied piece of land probably in the world. And so all of those issues that we talk about, the NEPA studies and all of that, there's a lot of that is already science-based, known, and so moving through that process, I think, is going to be a little simpler than it may be at other places. So I think that's important for those companies that are interested in locating on the site. So when we think about the projects that are adaptable for this site, there are three that come to mind, but they're not necessarily the only three. But we think about a small modular reactor as an example, and maybe a combination of them. As you just heard, the demand for electricity here is huge. And I think that you need to know that in advance, how much the demand is, because you're not going to have any problem in disposing of the electricity that gets generated. So I think that's a really important factor. There may be other places, the other four sites in the country, they may not have the demand for electricity that we do here. And the oil and gas industry is not going away anytime soon, in spite of what some people think about it. I mean, the movement from oil and gas to some other energy sources is going to take a long time. And I don't know what that period is, but if you think about it realistically, most of the experts will say it takes a minimum of 20 years to convert from one fuel to another fuel. That's just in the automobile arena. But if you get into electricity, it's a different story also. So I think that you have to think about that and the continued demand for electricity and the need for clean energy production, clean electricity production in our area. It's vital. So those are a couple of points. And then James, thank you for your comments, but I'd like to refer back to what's called a resource planning document that the utilities have to do and present to the Utility Commission in New Mexico. And so when I look at that document, you've got a couple of gas-fired plants that are very old, which James mentioned, and that will probably knock out 1,000 megawatts of production that Xcel has. And then they want to do away with their coal-fired plants. This is all public information from my perspective, but they want to do away with their coal plants. That's another loss of 1,000 megawatts. And then you talk about the demand, and the demand is probably somewhere really in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,000 or more megawatts just to keep things in place. Now, the Utility Commission has just heard this presentation from Excel, and that in that presentation, they're saying that they need, you know, a lot of electricity in the very near future. In fact, they are putting out an RFP, as I understand, in July sometime, and that RFP will ask for something in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,000 megawatts to be in place by the end of this decade. So between 28 and 30, they're expecting a lot of new production of electricity. And I also want to comment that we're a member of, or Excel is, of the Southwest Power Pool, which covers eastern New Mexico and Panhandle, Texas, and he said there's somewhat 15, 16 states that are involved in it. It goes from Louisiana, from the Gulf Coast, all the way up to Canada. So it's a big group of utilities that make up that power pool. And so when Excel thinks about, or at least these are comments that they've made to me, they think about 250 megawatts being generated that they can use internally with the RFP, but if they need to go to sell it to the Southwest Power Pool, then they need volumes like 250 megawatts to issue that out into the power pool. Now, Eddie asked a question about balancing. Well, balancing is done by ISOs across the United States, which are these invisible organizations that try to understand where the electrons are and where they aren't, and how to pull them into various places where they're needed. Excess goes to the ones that are needed. So the balancing doesn't necessarily occur in in Excel itself, or a generator, it occurs by these other organizations that understand where all the electrons are. And you talk about AI, it's a really sophisticated system that moves the electrons around. So at any rate, so that balancing does occur, and it occurs on a national basis, really. In fact, the ISOs go into Canada and across the United States to do all of the balancing that's needed. And I don't need to explain that. I'm just mentioning that. But I think that the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a huge demand for electricity, so any company that is worried about that should not be worried about it, because the demand is huge and it's growing, and whether the electricity is used actually on the site for a secondary company, or whether it's used to go to Excel, sold to them, or how it's used is what needs to be determined, because we know that there are a lot of companies out there that have some very sophisticated ideas like combining hydrogen and oxygen in the presence of a catalyst to create superheated steam, which would drive a turbine, as example. Those are the kind of things that could be used on site. A couple of others have been mentioned as we've discussed this. But I think that the most important thing is that those companies and those of you that are here that are interested in developing something, there is a huge community support. There's huge demand for power, and I think you've got a site that there's nowhere else in the world that's more understood, and I think moving through some of those areas are going to be a lot faster than what it might be otherwise. So I just wanted to mention a couple of those things. The projects that we think about are a hydrogen project. As you know, we're in the middle of the most robust area in the United States in terms of natural gas production and oil production. And so it's huge. New Mexico's the second largest oil producer now, next to Texas. And there's also all of the natural gas. Now, when we think about converting the natural gas to hydrogen, we also think about it in different terms. We think that we make green hydrogen because in the separation process, you can capture not only the hydrogen, but you can capture the carbon monoxide, which quickly converts to carbon dioxide. And then we have a disposal process for that in our part of the world, which is tertiary oil recovery. So it's actually pumped down into the oil wells, and it moves through the wells, and it then what it does is it reduces the viscosity or the thickness of the oil so it flows more readily, and then it's easier to bring to the surface. And that carbon dioxide gets sequestered underground. So because it gets sequestered, we think that what we're really doing is producing green hydrogen. So I think that's an important concept for companies to think about when they're doing this. And the oil companies will buy the carbon dioxide. They're presently piping it from northern New Mexico and sometimes in Texas. And it's much simpler to get it locally than it is to do that. So that's an important consideration. But I think hydrogen and what you do with it afterwards, whether you run it through a fuel cell to produce electricity or what you do. But I think those kind of thoughts, and then small modular reactors are something that have come of age, and in the next couple of years, there will be numerous ones out in the marketplace to be developed, and the electricity generated can either be used on site. We talked about the AI demands and some of the other huge demands that occur, whether they're used directly or indirectly, is a possibility. So I think that's also, and then of course, as you can see from the map, there's a huge area for possible solar development. So those are the things that we think about when we talk about the project for companies to be thinking about as well. And of course, we're open to any kind of discussion on any other project. So I hope that, I'm just trying to point out some attributes and hoping that there will be more and more companies that become interested in the WIPP site. We're a little bit remote, but that doesn't mean the electricity and the other activities aren't used, can be used close at hand, and we have plenty of KV lines, large KV lines for distribution. And so I think that please think about the WIPP site and all of their attributes, and I think any of us in the community would be very happy to respond to any questions you have. So thank you, Candace.
Thank you, sir.
Hope I didn't take too long.
No, that was great. That was great. That summarized a lot of key points. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from anyone in the audience? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sean O'Brien, here from the Hobbs Chamber of Commerce today. I've got a less technical question for you. As these requests for information and RFQs eventually go out, will that be made public knowledge on what organizations or what technologies are being considered?
Yes, so we're working on going through the responses right now and checking to make sure that the companies are comfortable with us releasing their names.
Okay.
And we've received, the responses we have received thus far are all positive. Yes, you may, but we're waiting for everyone to respond. But if not, we'll release what we can and summarize the rest. So yes, we will make that available to everybody. And then we'll cover next steps in a minute, but we've actually covered most of it already. So I'll just note that that we're looking at going straight to a final request for qualifications because we've done similar RFQs at Hanford in particular, but also the other sites. And so encourage developers and community and folks to be looking at what has already been released by the department, because that's going to be largely the model that we're using. And if there's things we need to be thinking about, we have an email box. Is it EM Clean Energy? I think it is at em.doe.gov.
Right, yeah.
Where you can always provide us input that's monitored all the time. So, we're open to that, but we're trying to streamline the bureaucracy as much as we can and try to go straight to final so we can get some selections made hopefully this year.
Yeah, and I will add to that too. 'Cause, you'd mentioned, so we have the Clean Energy website and the email address. We monitor that, and we get a lot of great information that has helped us along the way. So certainly from the community's perspective, if there are thoughts, ideas, things like that, and everything that we can and post, we post, because again, we want to be as transparent in the process as possible. Which is why we ask the companies, can we share? And if not, then we summarize and redact and things like that. But we share what we can. So for sure, keep monitoring that. And of course, we're happy to have conversations and do things like this or webinars or whatnot. Kind of along the way. So the input is incredibly valuable.
So that information is already being shared through the website?
Well, we haven't yet for
Okay.
WIPP. We're working on it because it just closed last week, I
20th.
think it is. So we're working on both getting clearance from the companies to post that they had submitted information, as well as getting all of the questions collected and getting responses ready for posting so that everyone can see the questions that were asked and what the responses are.
That's great.
Okay.
Now, second question was, this is a DOE initiative, but is there going to be similar assistance or support from other departments, DOT, or if nuclear selected NRC with these initiatives?
NRC will do what NRC does in terms
Right.
of making sure that everything is safe in the nuclear space, and so that regulatory process wouldn't be changed in any way. I think you'll probably see other agencies, I know we've already seen it out here from BLM, that are responding to the same executive order that we're responding to that says, hey, federal government, use the resources that you have available to address this climate challenge that we're facing. And so I know BLM is very active in this area as well, and they have land that might be of interest to folks. But beyond that, beyond agencies making their own resources available, I don't think there's anything else that you'll probably see there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have learned a lot of lessons from DoD
Yeah.
because what we're modeling is part of what we've seen with some of the Air Force work as well. So I mean there is a lot of sharing of lessons. So and of course this all stems from a presidential executive order for clean energy and getting to that. So there's lots of different. I mean everybody in the federal government is focused in their own right on different things. So I mean there is some intersect there too.
Yeah.
Great.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Any other questions or comments? Over here.
So I didn't quite realize this at the beginning, but it just came out. The whole thing is based on an executive order, not on a public law. Is that correct?
So the catalyst for this initiative was largely based on the executive order.
Right.
The authority for us to do this is based on the WIPP Land Withdrawal Act that allows for multiple uses.
Correct. But if we have a change in administration, that could basically all be stopped in November or December, theoretically at least, right?
Correct.
So, okay. So in that, from that perspective, the whole thing, as far as the long-term prospects are concerned, it's still quite iffy, as long as it is not really covered by, let's say, a specific legislation that's enacted to make this a little bit more permanent. But I wanted to comment on another aspect, and I'm probably going into an area there that I really don't understand, and I think Greg maybe might want to jump in on that one. If I were today the safety manager or the security manager, I should say, for any kind of generating plant, I would be having nightmares every night, because our infrastructure, our generating and transmission infrastructure is so vulnerable in case of war or to terrorists and so on. That's unbelievable. The general public, I don't think, has any idea of how vulnerable it is. Taking out just one major substation, or even worse, a dozen of them, makes it almost impossible to restore power, because they are all custom made, the big ones, and they are made all in other countries, not here in the United States. So there was a supply chain comment earlier, and that supply chain issue would exceed anything that we ran through during, that we encountered during COVID. One of the potential advantages of putting something with energy production in a federal facility or on federal property such as WIPP is that there is already a security force there. And then, of course, again, Greg may want to correct me on that, but I think protecting one 500 megawatt nuclear power block would be a heck of a lot easier than protecting 20 or 30 generating places that each one of them generates maybe 20 or 50 megawatts. So I think that might be another advantage that could be highlighted as far as what is possible here at WIPP.
Thank you. And I'll just, before we turn to Greg on any security issues, I'll just note that in terms of potential change in administration, obviously I would never speak for a future administration, but what we've seen out of Congress so far is broad bipartisan support for this initiative, as long as we are continuing our laser focus, and we are, on our core missions at these sites, and as long as we're not expending funding that is not authorized to be expended on this, which is why developers would need to pay for the NEPA process and things like that. But thus far, we haven't seen any pushback based on philosophical lines. So we have reason to believe that what we are doing and the way we are approaching it will be sustainable, but we obviously can't guarantee what might happen in the future. Greg, do you want to talk about any security issues? I know that security of electricity is not necessarily your role, but maybe.
No, not my role at all. Well, except for the power distribution at the facility. But Norbert, I think you're right. The threats in the world are real, and I think security is both a cost of business and a moral obligation. So your question about whether it's easier to protect one large location or multiple, that's a matter of strategic planning. It's a matter of critical thinking. In some cases, it could be easier to protect everything if it's collected, like all your eggs in one basket. But then there's the danger and the risk of having it all in one place. So it's a matter of strategic planning, and I think any work project that gets proposed and be accepted should take those considerations. And there would be somebody responsible for the energy security in that regard. And how to do that? Well, we all have our own approaches. My father, great man, taught me that evil's real, and we have an obligation to fight it, which is why I take this job on. And the way we do it is through faith, strength, and skill. And part of that skill is that critical thinking and strategic planning, and try to anticipate what malicious acts or potential adversaries might do it. And there's a cost to that. So it has to be applied to a project of this nature. And they're probably hiring, so maybe you and I can put our applications in.
Thank you, Greg.
Did that answer your question?
Thank you, and I'm beyond belief on that one.
Are there any other questions? John?
Make another comment I did not make, and that. Thank you. The other comment I'd like to make that I did not make is that the state of New Mexico has a number of incentive programs that can help offset some of the costs One is they have a substantial amount of job training money that can be used to train your workforce in the beginning and for additions to that. So there is that capability. There is a technical jobs tax credit that is available. There's also a rural jobs tax credit which is available, and of course we could the county could also issue a bond that would allow the company to escape property taxes, of which I guess there won't be, because except for their equipment and other kinds of part of their tax complex can be eliminated. So there are a number of those things that we would be happy to work with a company in defining those and taking advantage of them to the extent that you would wish to do so. So I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. We can move on to next steps. I think we've probably already covered that, but just to kind of recap, so we've closed the request for information. The next step is we're analyzing that, summarizing it, posting the questions and the responses on the website in the near term. And then we're looking at potentially being able to go to a final request for qualifications maybe as early as middle of April, but it'll somewhat depend on what comes out of the RFI. And then we would engage in actually analyzing any proposals that come in. What we've been seeing is 30 to 45 days is how long we've typically been posting the request for qualifications to get proposals in. And like I said, we're hoping to actually make a decision by the end of this year so that we can get going. And then of course, this is BLM land that DOE manages. It's just withdrawn from other uses besides what the federal government needs to do. So we are going to we have been and will continue to consult with the Department of Interior and BLM on the usage of this land. And I think that's it. Did I miss anything? So that's it for next steps. And again, just want to thank you all for your interest and for your time. Great comments, great dialogue, and please check out our website and stay tuned for more information. Thank you all.